spent in a miserable way.
U.S. News Rubio, Paul and Graham have Trump's foreign policy in Miami Herald. January the 28th, 2019 0600 am. 3 years ago, Marco Rubio, Rand Paul and Lindsey Graham were fighting to stay in Donald Trump's orbit as he pulled away in the Republican presidential primary. Now, the three senators with distinct foreign policy views view Paul as libertarian while Rubio and Graham are noted hawks who prioritize different regions of the world who are able to claim varying pieces of influence and credit for Trump's foreign policy approach during his first 2 years in office. Rubio notably persuaded Trump to roll back some of Barack Obama's Cuba changes to fulfill a campaign promise and has been a constant voice urging action against Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, an approach that paid off this week with multilateral recognition of an opposition leader as Venezuela's rightful leader. Graham met with Turkey. A scattershot foreign policy approach from the president has allowed the three former rivals for the GOP's presidential nomination to gain influence through White House dinners with Venezuelan opposition leaders and golf outings with the president. And Trump do it for the most comprehensive local coverage. Subscribe today. There are certain issues like trade, alliances, general sympathy for dictators, that are fairly consistent for the president over time, and where he seems to have much more fully fleshed out preferences, said Rebecca Lissner, a professor at the U.S. Naval War College who has studied and written extensively about Trump's foreign policy. There are a lot of other areas, she explained, where his instincts are much less honed and he cares much less about, and on those issues where he is less knowledgeable, less committed, spoken less on the record, those are the issues where he is much more persuadable, and those are the areas where, at the right time, those who do get in his ear have an opportunity to assert even some considerable influence. It speaks for itself, Lissner added, if Trump really was being guided by such disparate figures as Rubio, Graham, and Paul. If you believe there is any coherence to this administration's foreign policy under President Trump's leadership, it is very hard to see how he could be under the influence of Sr. Graham and Sr. At a rally in Columbia, SE, Donald Trump talks about Sr. Lindsey Graham and nudging the president. The cycle of cheering on the president in one breath and taking him to task days later, often through Trump's preferred medium of Twitter, creates a constant push and pull between three of the most prominent members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Eric Farnsworth, a former State Department official and now Vice President of the Council of the Americas in Washington, said the high-profile positions taken by Rubio, Graham and Paul open up space for the administration to satisfy them, even if they'd go as far as Paul would prefer in drawing down troop levels around the world or implement Rubio's preferred ban on Venezuelan oil imports. It does seem to me that there has been a lot of political space claimed by the legislature, by Senator Rubio and others, Farnsworth said. The Trump administration, the latest schism between the trio is on Turkey, a NATO ally led by a man who has cracked down on dissent and free speech after a 2016 coup attempt. While Graham was Senator Marco Rubio and the NBA's Enes Kanter discussed the death threats and travel restrictions against Kanter because of his criticism of Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Graham said he went to Turkey at Trump's urging. The president wanted me to go talk to Turkey, so I did, he told McClatchy. I told him I would. After their meeting, Erdogan invited Graham to see Fazıl Say, a famous Turkish pianist. Graham in the front, the Syria question. It's still not clear what Trump will ultimately decide when it comes to Syria or if he'll facilitate a slow withdrawal as the US troops and allies work to defeat ISIS, which Graham wants, or forge ahead with his original plan for a rapid retreat, as pushed by Paul. But it was a sign of Trump's confidence in Graham and interest in having him involved that he sent a senator to Turkey as a representative of the United States. It was essentially, the president's approach to foreign policy has largely been to not publicly advocate leaders he is trying to reach accommodation or agreement with, Rubio said. I have long said that Rubio has repeatedly said that Venezuela is different when asked about Trump's conciliatory approach to Russia and Saudi Arabia. He notes that but when Trump displays flashes of being a non-interventionist, particularly with his Syria decision late last year, Paul becomes his biggest cheerleader in the Senate. Most of the voices around here like to stay everywhere for all time, and they believe that it does work unless you go somewhere and stay forever, Paul said in a Senate floor speech. It's not so much. Paul also backs ending the Cuba embargo, a long-standing point of contention between the Kentucky senator and Rubio, a Cuban-American from Miami. Paul once turned limits to influence. Though each of the three has a respective lane on foreign policy decisions, listener cautioned against giving Graham, Paul and Rubio too much credit. They may have solicited small concessions on some issues, but I would think they have influences on the margins, really that they align with the president on certain discrete matters rather than meaningfully altering his worldview, listener said. Take Saudi Arabia, for example. Paul is along, I can never do business with Saudi Arabia again until we get this behind us, Graham. But Trump released a statement 2 months after Khashoggi's murder titled Standing with Saudi Arabia. The exclamation, though Graham, Rubio and Paul all opposed the Crown Prince, they were unable to influence the president to rebuke the US's second largest source of imported oil. I understand there are members of Congress who, for political or other reasons, would like to go in a different direction and they are free to do so. I will consider what it. Alex Doherty is the Washington correspondent for the Miami Herald, covering South Florida from the nation's capital. Previously, Emma Dumais works out of the McClatchy Washington Bureau, where she reports on the South Carolina congressional delegation for the state, the Herald, the Sun News, the Island Packet and the Beaufort Gazette. She was previous, January the 29th, 2019 0318 am. China's foreign ministry has called on Washington to withdraw its request for Canada to extradite a Huawei executive to face charges of lying to banks about possible dealings with Iran. For the most comprehensive local coverage, subscribe today. Real-time updates and all local stories you want right in the palm of your hand.
Raindrops, drop top, smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park pot.